I am also a value maker, so I've been a value maker since 2015. For my sins, when just in the very early days, when there was only about 20 of us, I think, nationally, and it was an annual like value maker and application process. I'm vice chair of HFMA Northwest, which is where I might know some of you in the Northwest from. And yeah, and a cricketer, as you've already gathered from the conversation with Sarah. I'm just going to talk you through a little bit of kind of why wellbeing for us, and why for us the staff survey was kind of the conversation starter to it, but it's really opened up our minds and our thoughts to kind of what are we not seeing around our staff wellbeing. So, bit of context for me and MIAA is I've only been here since November. Before that was at Merseycare for a number of years. So for me, that was a positive. That was a really positive thing, because as a new person, I came in without any preconceived ideas about any perceptions around anybody. You know, the usual things that you might, if you'd worked in an organisation for a long time, you might see people working longer hours and go, well, that's just John. He always works long hours, or that's just Jane. Sometimes she gets a bit snappy when she's a bit tired, or all these different things. I didn't have any of that. I just came in and I was just, you know, meeting people the first time and kind of chatting to people and experiencing life in MIA without any of that. And that was really good, because I was just able to kind of ask why, and kind of like notice things maybe a little bit that people who have been in the same teams or in the same organization for a while might not notice it, because we're all really busy, and it's sometimes it is there are small tiny things, aren't they, that indicate that staff aren't quite right sometimes, and sometimes obviously there are bigger ones. But I'll go on to kind of show you some of the stuff, and that this has all happened since November. I would say before November, MIA was in a good place anyway, so it was already towards Excellence Level 3 accredited before I joined. Investors and People Gold. So it already did have a really strong culture of development and support to staff. And it already had 5 or 6 wellbeing champions from across the different areas, some mental health first aiders in that. So I would say that of any organisation, it was already fairly, it felt like it was doing something in the wellbeing space. And I think that's why, for me, when I came in and I just noticed little small micro indicators, that I thought, I just feel like we need to think about whether we need to do a little bit more. And being new, I think I probably did get a bit more flexibility to kind of take part in the Mind Wellbeing Index. So it's not a promotional tool list for Mind Wellbeing Index. I don't want you to think that you all have to go off and do that. It's more around, as we go through this, maybe thinking about, you know, it could be wellbeing, it could be any of the other indicators in the staff survey that you see and you think, I wonder what's behind that number. So I'll come on in a bit and tell you a bit more about that. As we go through, more than happy to answer any questions. Put your hand up. I can't see anybody, so hopefully you can just either interrupt me or yourself, or you know, you can, yeah, you can. I'll probably be able to see a hand, possibly. I'm not sure. I can only see one blob on there. So yeah, feel free to interrupt. I'm more than happy. There isn't necessarily a flow. I just want it to be quite open and honest and conversational. So I want you to get the most out of it. And as I say, if it's not about wellbeing, think about what other things in the staff survey you might consider looking at over the next year. So obviously this is about wellbeing in its biggest sense, and it is just around everything that, you know, everything that makes us human, isn't it? You know, being human. So I've created this kind of like flow to show you a little bit about what we'll talk about, but kind of about what order it went in, and kind of why it went in this order. So we do start with 1, but it is a cycle, because we obviously will go back to 1 with the information that we gain. We'll go back to knowing something, and then we'll have to see whether the cycle is improved in terms of our staff's wellbeing, and what difference the interventions that we choose to make will have on our wellbeing and our staff survey. So yeah, so we've got what we know. So the what we know, I'll go on to some more detail on them, but I'll just cover them really briefly now. What we know is our staff survey primarily. In MIA, I would say the numbers who take part in the staff survey are where fairly low for the organisation. Now, response rates are fairly low generally, aren't they? You know, you don't get a lot of staff taking part, particularly in the national staff survey when it's such a long survey, isn't it? About 15 or 10-15 minutes. I think the national pulse quarterly surveys that we're now doing will get greater uptake because they are so much quicker to do. But they didn't get a lot of uptake because they never really showcased the information. They never shared the information internally. They never took the information into internal business meetings. So in all honesty, people wouldn't value it and probably wouldn't take part, because why would you take part if you don't know that it makes a difference or does anything? There's no, you've got to, you said, we did, you've got to know kind of what impact your feedback is having, haven't you? So we will be moving on that. We will be improving on that, and we're doing work already to raise the profile of the staff survey, including taking part in the quarterly pulse surveys, which are a microset, aren't they, of the national staff survey. So we know that the data will improve in quantity, and as the quantity improves, obviously the quality will, because it'll make it more meaningful and representative of all of our staff. And we've got 110 odd staff in MIAA across finance, assurance, and advisory services, including some other things like digital and stuff, which are quite cool areas to work in. What did we see? Well, we saw information. We saw like things in our, we saw behaviours. We saw people being off sick, so we saw the sickness data. So I don't know whether the sickness data is something that you have access to in or see regularly, either at your team or departmental level, but we saw that. And for me, when I first started, I came onto, I kind of was doing this like almost like what's it called, like almost like a shadowing. So I came from my first month was before November, was October, and I just came to the executive meetings on a Monday just to kind of sit in on them. But the recurring theme was so and so's off sick, and these people are off sick, and the organisation was responding then to kind of, who's picking up that work and what's going on and stuff like that. And so for me, I didn't do anything about it initially, but once I was employed, I was like, I just feel like it's something that we come back to every week. We come back to maybe staff being off sick. Now, you can't be too alarmed by that, because we're talking about November. So we're talking about, if you look at a sickness absence curve, you're always going to think that there is a bit of a, there's a winter flu kind of COVID still in those numbers, and other things. So it's not purely around anything that, is always achievable for an organisation to support people on. But even so, even without the reason codes being known, it just felt like we were talking about sickness an awful lot. And you want to talk about wellness, don't you, really, in your organisation? Then what we hear, obviously, was through one-to-ones, through team meetings, through obviously the exec meetings, like I've mentioned. So really being kind of open to kind of and trying to notice things a little bit, being a bit more sort of alive to kind of noticing things in meetings, noticing people who were normally quiet, who might be might be sharper than normal, noticing people who were normally on it who are maybe a little bit distracted. All these little very small things sometimes that can just tell you whether things are not, people aren't feeling great. Obviously things like working hours as well as a little bit of a contributor, isn't there, in terms of people working late or early and getting tired then, and then becoming unwell because they're tired. So we decided collectively, although obviously it was prompted by my questions really in that exact space, to say, are we doing enough really? Do we know that we're doing enough? Could we really stand there and say that we're doing everything we should be doing, given we've only got very low numbers of respondents into the wellbeing, into the staff survey? So it all does come back very much to the staff survey. So we'll go on to a little bit more. So when you look at the staff survey data, said even with the low response rates, there are some definite themes in there, and these 4 things were really kind of triggers for it, really, for me to kind of say, what more can we do in this space? Even with the wellbeing champions and even with the mental health first aiders, are we still doing everything we need to be doing? So the staff survey data told us 75% of staff worked more hours than contracted. Obviously, in the staff survey that goes from more than up to 5 hours more, all the way up to something more significant. But 3/4 of staff worked more than their contracted hours, which is a huge number. 1/3 of staff had work-related stress in the last 12 months. Again, you know, a big number to feel that. 2 staff are, so you could say that's a good number because it's only 2 staff. So you could just use that only 2 staff felt pressure for manager to attend work. But from me, 2 is too many. And then the other thing for me, the opposite of that is people put themselves under pressure probably more than managers, don't they? You get presentees and where staff are attending work, even if they don't feel well and they don't feel that they're able to tell the manager. So the manager isn't pressurizing them, but they are putting themselves under pressure. So there's something around that for me that triggered that, even with a small number of 2, because it should really be 0. 75% of 70% staff, saying that they're finding work emotionally exhausting at the time. And we know, you know, the difficulty with staff survey data is it's great and it's obviously longitudinal, as in it covers a multiple periods, years. So you've got years worth of data to be able to say whether you're improving, your trends are improving, and you can really measure your improvements if you've got something that you put in place that is a long strategy. But it only happens once a year. So you know that by the time you get the data, so you know it happens October, November, and you get the data sort of May time, you know that, you know, you kind of see these numbers and you go, 70% of staff back in October felt work emotionally exhausting and nothing's happened, or has it? You know, how can we be assured that we've supported staff between them doing the survey and where they are now? Or is that the reason why we're getting staff absence and things like that? And for me, that's in my head kind of quite a lot in terms of, you know, is there more that we could do? So what we see, and I've mentioned this, the staff sickness rate, obviously don't ignore the first one because it just comes up from 0, but you can see back in January 2022, and as I said, there's a cyclical thing to it around COVID really in January 2022 still, but November 2022, the circled one is when I came into post, and obviously again aligns with the fact that I was just saying, hang on guys, we're talking about sickness a lot here. Is that normal for us to talk about it every single week, like for it almost to be the leading item for each exec to say, yeah, we've got some sickness again this week? So I started asking them for monthly sickness data, and the monthly sickness data shows you the reasons for absence. So you can look at short-term, long-term, you can look at reasons for absence, and you can look at the numbers of staff with triggers and make sure that if people are unwell and are at trigger points, then you can support them with the appropriate occupational health referrals and any other things. So you know, depending on their reason for absence. I would also say that in looking at the monthly sickness data, as I have since sort of November, December, the number of staff and or managers who report with nothing specified, as in no specific reason for absence, is really high for us. And for me, that's multifactorial. It could be that the individual isn't really able to possibly describe what the signs and symptoms are enough detail to be able to, for their manager to be able to pick a reason code for absence. But that's something that we've got as something to work on over the next year to help staff and managers know what the reasons codes are. So instead of having a big long conversation, you know, if you've got something like diarrhea and vomiting, you might not want to go into loads of detail about how you're feeling and what your symptoms are. But if you knew the reason code was, you know, 05 or 04, you could use the actual words on the reason code and not go into too much detail. That might be a bit easier for people. So we're looking at that as well, because the better sickness absence data that we can get, the better, the more better decisions we can make. So yeah, so we saw that, and that was, as I say, that was a concern for me back in November. It is leveling off a little bit now. I think we are down to just over 2% now on the 12-month. So yeah, on the 12-month rolling average, we're around 2%, and we're 2.3 on the 12-month rolling averages, with 2% in the in-month number. But we do have a couple of long-term sickness absences relating to cancer as well within that. So obviously they're not ones that, you know, we can support the individuals and the staff, but we can't really, there's nothing much we can support on other than that as an organisation. So what do we hear? And I've mentioned this just being really kind of, it's really good when you're in an office, as in on Teams. Much harder to do this as accurately and as in such a holistic way if you're on Teams all the time. And if you've got a department who's 100% on Teams, whilst that's extremely good for work-life balance for many of staff, just think about maybe what you're missing, and maybe how you think about how you might get that in some way. Because if you, my cat is outside the door crying like a banshee because he's been locked out. 1 second, that's affected my well-being. 1 second. You're gonna have to shush. Monica, come on, come on. No, shush. Sorry about that. It's distracting me. So yeah, how do you do that well if you are 100% at home? And I guess that's a little challenge I'll put out to anybody who spends a lot of time where their work lives are at home as much as in the office, because you don't get the coffee, you know, the lunch breaks, or they go and make a cup of tea for somebody, or they, you know, does anybody want a coffee? Let's go and get a coffee and we'll walk over to the coffee shop together. And you don't get you can't overhear any of the wider conversations, can you, around how people are feeling and stuff. So how do you do that? And how do you create that space to do that as effectively? Obviously, we've got our appraisal system. It's called WorkPal, which is why it's called WorkPal Appraisal, but it's just called WorkPal. And we've got a specific question in there that asks these 2 questions. So staff are asked to rate themselves 1 to 5, obviously 5 being work is doing everything possible that it needs to do and there aren't any other resources I need, down to 1, which is I don't feel very supported and I don't feel there are enough resources available. It's managers are asked as well then to kind of support that conversation. So if an individual did say 1 or 2 or 3, you'd be kind of really opening up a conversation about what more you can do. The downside of the WorkPal appraisal is that's a 1-year conversation. So I think what you've got then is you've got the National Staff Survey, which is a once a year conversation or once a year survey in around October, and our appraisal is a once a year conversation, usually around June or July. So, but then what you've got are 2 opportunities, aren't there? 2 official opportunities, and everything else needs to be created in as a way of asking. Obviously, we've got one-to-ones and team meetings, and encouraging managers to open up the team meetings around how is everybody today, you know, those type of you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you, how was your weekend, those type of things. So really trying to open up with, or close down with, some more informal well-being conversations. Particularly one-to-ones. Obviously it's harder in team meetings if they're a big team that people maybe won't want to open up in, but certainly one-to-ones you'd expect an element of well-being to be in a one-to-one around, is there anything I can do or we can do to support you? And then we do have our wellbeing champions, and they do meet regularly, and they are our eyes and ears as well, because obviously, so they're from the 5 or 6 of them are from across our business units, so they will bring their own kind of, this is what people have said in my business unit, and these are the things that they're struggling with at the moment, and this, we've had this happen. And so they do bring a different dimension, a broader kind of sense that I probably don't get, because I only see, you know, so many people in the month, and I'm in one office. I don't go to our other couple of offices very regularly. So it's kind of about how do you seed these listening ears into your team, so that you've got lots of people listening to, not for any other reason other than to understand. So about listening to understand. I think it's probably explaining to people what you want in that, because often people feel uncomfortable sometimes if they hear somebody's not well, or they hear that they need support, they worry that they can't help them, and there's an element of like they feel like they fail, you know, if they hear that somebody needs something, particularly on mental health, if they feel somebody's, you know, stressed or depressed or anxious, and then they're told that, they feel like they need to solve it for them, and obviously that's not necessarily what it's about. For us, it's around within MIAA. It's like around signposting then to the wellbeing champions, of whom some of them are mental health first aiders. And if they can't kind of provide a bit of support and guidance, they'll signpost into the trust. So it's around seeding those listening ears in your organisations to say you're not solving it, but we just need you to kind of tell us how it feels to be working in your teams right now, and kind of what we can do to help you. So yeah, so that those things that what we saw, what we heard, what we knew, all led us to this, well, led me to this position, which I challenged it's our senior team, and why that until you really kind of, we could take it really simply and go, well, there was only 2 people who out of 110 whose managers forced them to come into work, and think that that's a really low number, so it's okay. Or you can try and understand a little bit more about it and see whether you can understand more about what the person needs in a more, with some more open questions and different types of questions than the staff survey does, because the staff survey is really good and I absolutely value it as a tool for staff engagement, but those questions don't really change very often, and we needed something a little bit more consultative, some more opportunities for open questions, or opportunities for staff to write in their own words what they were feeling around wellbeing, and that's what the Mind survey did for us. So I'm going to share some stuff now around about what this is, but so yeah, so I pitched it in November when I came, and I said, look, I just feel like if I sit here as a new member of staff, would you, as 3 existing members of staff, would you all think we're doing enough on wellbeing? And they all came back and said no. So I said, well, rather than us being in that position, let's attempt to get some better feedback from our staff that's more responded to, so we know we've got most staff have responded to it, and let's then take some really meaningful action on it. And that meaningful action probably will take the form of very short-term actions all the way through to much longer-term actions. But then we should be able to measure the impact through the staff survey and through the National Quarterly Pulse survey. So that I'm on the fence at the moment about doing the index again next year. It is an annual thing. This time it did cost us £3,000 to do it. And I probably only got it because I was new and they kind of wanted to make me so, and recognise it's a financial cost that many organisations probably would choose to spend the money differently on. I thought, given everything I was seeing, hearing and experiencing, that it was probably worth it, but I'm not convinced that I'll do another year of it. I'll just yeah, I'm still thinking about it, but we've got, the window's open till about November or December, so I've got a little bit of time. So it's embargoed. Our overall score, we have been given an overall score, but it's embargoed until Mind actually release it on our behalf. So I don't know what that looks like. Some fireworks will go off somewhere, wherever Mind are based. But this is what it does. And it was similar to an accreditation journey. So it was a self-assessment element. So I had to provide a lot of information around what our wellbeing strategy is, or things we've done in wellbeing, what we know about wellbeing, what do we know about sickness absence, what do we know about turnover rate, what do we know from exit interviews around people's feedback, what do we know from various different things, and you submit that in as like an evidence portfolio, and then the staff are asked to take part in a survey. It's open for 2 months, but you can choose to do it over a shorter period of time, and we chose specifically to run it for 2 weeks. And we got 89 of our 110 staff taking part. So we absolutely had amazing uptake. We did it as part of an all-staff meeting, a virtual all-staff meeting. So we switched the screen off, we ran the survey, and we played some relaxing music that had a countdown on it for the 20 minutes that it took. So it wasn't the shortest survey, but yeah, we still had a very high participation rate, which was brilliant. 61 other organisations nationally take part, in our benchmark for the report that we have got is public sector. So it's fairly reasonable. It's not going to be perfect because it's not finance teams in the public sector, but it's going to give us an idea of where we are doing well or are challenged. So yeah, so these are just some of them. There are a lot of questions in there, and there was a lot of opportunity for staff to write what they wanted to write. So the themes are culture and engagement, and around how you good line management, and obviously this comes into the stuff around, my manager forced me to come to work type of comment. So we were keen to know what that looks like. And obviously think other things around feeling stressed in work, feeling pressure to be in work when you're can you work flexibly, those type of things. So I won't read them out. Flexible working again. This one was interesting because this also talked about, does your manager role model healthy work-life balance, or and those type of things, which obviously I think that's not always possible, is it? And I've been very clear with my team, if I do email in the evening and weekends, there's not an expectation for them to do the same, but it's very easy for that to become a subculture in an organisation. Even if you say that, it just especially with us being so busy, all of us being so busy, and recognising that we are busier than ever. So it's about individuals being able to say that if they can't feel that they can complete their tasks and objectives within a normal standard 37.5 or whatever their contracted hours are, rather than feeling like they need to flex it. However, I would say that MIA, we document our work, flexible working arrangements very, very stringently. I say stringently, like as if it's like, but it's really, we have a flexible working arrangement in place for every member of staff who works flexibly, which is probably why we've got 93% of respondents saying that we offer flexible working arrangements, because it's documented and then reviewed, and at least annually or when it changes, which means that we know what proportion of our staff are off on a Friday. We know what proportion of our staff work compressed hours, and we've got a range of different compressed hours, from term time only, from 10 days in 9 to from 5 days in 4. We've got early starts, we've got people who work school hours and then make up the time in the evening, but we are really, really clear on that, so that I think that helps a lot of our staff to manage their workload and the work-life balance. But yeah, that's probably the reason for that having such a high response rate. So Minds is obviously a mental health organisation, and that for me was one of the main reasons for choosing Minds as opposed to any other wellbeing survey tool, because there was anxiety, there was depression coming through in the reasons for absence, and there was all those not able to say what the reason code was, and just thinking through that pragmatically, I felt it was probably more likely really that it might be mental health related than anything, because that's probably going to be one of the hardest things for you to kind of talk about in a workplace situation. And I feel like, feel safe in opening those discussions up from a psychological safety perspective. And whilst I know we try our best, I wanted to make sure we were doing ourselves and our staff justice in relation to mental health. So there are some challenges in here. I think if you look at the lowest two on here, only half, so 45 of the staff think that we encourage openness and discussion about mental health, and feel that staff at MIA have got good awareness and knowledge of mental health. So they give us recommendations. So they've given us a recommendation for each of these subcategories, as well as 3 overall recommendations that we can choose to take forward. And they will give us support if we need to raise any awareness raising or and things like that. But this one particularly is one that we definitely need to do, because there was a couple of incidences in here around feedback around I feel uncomfortable about admitting to a mental health condition, so I've probably not raised it as soon as I should, because I'm worried about the impact on my job. And if you think about it, I mean, I would argue it's probably the same in any job, but particularly in audit and assurance, the ability, there's some really strict rules around that, aren't there, from internal governance and controls and stuff. And if then you say to your member staff says to you that they don't feel well enough to kind of work, you might feel compromised at putting them in a role that has with staff facing, client facing roles and those type of things. So you can understand why people might be. So we've got to do more on that. We really do. And this has given us obviously the insight into that, but given those large numbers. So it's not 2 now, we're talking about 40 odd people have said that potentially we don't have enough openness and discussion around mental health. That's, they're big numbers, aren't they? But these are some of the good things. So we do have health and wellbeing champions. Are they visible enough? Are they active enough? Are they approachable enough? We think so, but maybe not, because half of the staff are saying that we don't talk about mental health enough. Good work and excellent support, and the wellbeing area on the internet has grown. So we're trying to cover off, the staff where they might not feel like they could talk about it, but they could reach into the internet and just access it themselves without needing to tell anybody that they were feeling unwell. So we do a lot of push communications on. We've got a staff hub that's got like a ticker that goes around at the top, like an internet ticker that shows 5 different stories on rotation, and we'll push a lot of the wellbeing things up to that ticker so that when people open up the internet page, they're there first thing. So, pushing out the messages as opposed to just waiting for somebody to come to you is really important. So what we know, part 2, because we're going back around this loop again, aren't we? Have I put the loop in? Oh yeah, no I haven't. But so we've got some information on our strengths and weaknesses. That wellbeing index has given us a lot of that information in a much greater level of I've got more assurance that the numbers are valid, so that they're meaningful for us, meaning that we can actually do something, make it representative for everybody, and not kind of value for money, kind of spending time developing these things. If it was just for a small number of people, you would, whilst important, you'd be thinking I'd probably need to deal with this one first because it's most people are saying this. It's just giving us a sense of priorities in terms of like now, next, and then in the future. We can put those priorities and objectives into the wellbeing group, and we can put some priorities into the senior leadership team and into different forums like the managers group and the student peer group. And now we can measure our progress through sickness data, one-to-ones, team meetings, quarterly pulse, and national staff survey. So I noticed when I got the quarterly pulse in Q1, so that's just closed in May, our engagement rate had gone up from, I think it was 7, so 6.9 or 7 to 7.2 in the quarterly pulse. So it was 6.9 or 7 in the national staff survey just in October or November. Now, can't say that was to do with, you can't pin it down. Unfortunately, it's not like that. It's not a binary yes no thing. It's definitely staff engagement one's a feeling, it's a behavior, it's an emotional thing. It's around whether people feel like valued, and it's so many different things within that, but motivated. But if you the fact that we're asking these questions and we want to hear from them, and then we're saying that we value what you're going to tell us and we're going to make some choices, and it may just have may just be a part of the reasons for that. So we've got ticks on those. I thought I put in the thingy. Oh yeah. So we come back again, don't we then? Because now I know what I know from the wellbeing index. It kind of has made that box a little bit bigger, and I'll be back into the cycle again now. So what do I see? And I'm starting to see some of the staff survey, quarterly pulse improvements, starting to see sickness leveling off, but it's June, so would I see sickness leveling off anyway? Probably. So we need more data on that. We need longer data on that, couple of seasons data on that to know whether that's really making a difference. But we go around the loop, and I think at any point we need to be prepared to stop again and get to 4 and say that's not working, or do we need to do something different? But I think the wellbeing index has given us loads of ideas, but ideas based on evidence. So we know that what we do is going to make a difference to our team because that's what they've told us they need. So that was it, I think. How long for time? Oh, not too bad. A little bit of time for chat. Do I need? Can I take my screen down now so I can see people as well? Maybe. Is everybody asleep? So what? How do? Oh, Karen, hello. You sneaked in there. How do you what do you think? Does it resonate with you? Do you kind of, when you see well-being in your teams, do you think you kind of know that you're doing everything you can do? Or do you think every now and again you get a little bit of like, oh, I'm just not sure, like, or this has happened, and you kind of put it down to a low number, or it's only one person who's saying this, or there's only a small group of staff that this affecting, so you kind of, but maybe, what views have we got around the group? Who's willing to say something? We can stop recording it now, maybe. Do you think? That might encourage people to talk then, because I don't mind my bit being talked about.
I just turn it off.
Thank you, lovely.